morning. Thank you guys so much for coming. We're so grateful that you guys could all be here tonight and that we can all learn and grow together. And I hope you find it informative and educational and really rewarding that you guys are here. Well, I'm Mallory Christensen. I'm the Family Ministries team leader here at Heartland, and my job really focuses on you guys, the parents, the ones taking care of those kiddos, the ones on the front lines, and my job is to encourage you, support you, and come behind you as a parent. So again, we are so grateful that you guys are here tonight. I just want to give you a little bit of info of how the night's going to kind of go. If you guys haven't, go out and grab a little wrap just to make sure you guys are eating. There's chips at the table. There's waters out there if you need a little water. We're going to have a break at around 7:15. It's going to be about a 10-minute break, and there's going to be little cookies and snacks out there, and that can be a little bathroom break for everybody. And then we're going to come right back in here and finish the night. And there's going to be moments of discussion and interactive conversations, and so there's a little pen and paper for you guys at your spot that you guys can fill out, take some notes as we go throughout the night. But again, we're so glad you guys are here, and we really hope you enjoy.
And my name is Ben Shaw, and I'm one of the pastors on call here at Heartland Community Church, and just also wanted to thank you for coming. We sold out. We're a little packed. So thanks for registering ahead of time and working with us. We hope to try and continue kind of these one-night events that spark, obviously, a little bit of interest. So thanks for helping us affirm that this is a need. Would love to hear how you thought about it later on, email or whatever, however you want to contact us. And there's something on the back, and I'll talk more about Care Ministries and that advertisement when we wrap up at the end. I won't bore you with that now. But looking forward to Jonathan leading us tonight. Recruited him to do this several months ago, and he's one of the more gifted teachers I've ever met. And he just does a fantastic job, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy watching him, listening to him, and then kind of digesting some things that I'm sure we all can relate to. If you're a parent, or you've even been around kids, or you've seen a kid have a meltdown in an airport, then you're probably going to be able to relate to some of this stuff and obviously have questions about it. So we hope to be able to help with that and help you to leave tonight with a few tools. So without further ado, we'll get started.
And if you guys need to, you guys can turn your seats around for the people facing the back. So feel free to do that if you need to.
I'm naughty boy. I'm naughty boy. Naughty baby. Naughty baby. He's a naughty baby.
It's okay.
Naughty baby. Naughty baby.
What does it mean to be bossy?
You like to talk back to people.
Yeah. Is there anyone bossy in your house?
I'm sometimes a little bossy, but not that much though. It's no. It's yes, it is. He's really bossy. No, it's Kinks because he always asks. No, Kinks always asks for cheese. No. Yeah, well, I do. He's late, so it's Kingston.
What does bossy mean?
People telling you what to do.
Is there anyone bossy at your house?
Yeah.
Who's that?
My sister.
Your sister? She bossy around a lot?
Yeah.
Who breaks more rules, you or your sister?
My sister.
Your sister? All right.
Well, yeah. Bossy means that you keep on waking them up too much.
Keep waking them up too much? Are you bossy to your mom?
A little bit.
A little bit. You wake her up a lot?
You tell everyone to do everything for you?
Like Greg, get out of this room.
Okay.
Greg, your sister's bossy around a lot?
Yeah.
Emma does.
Yeah. Ben does. He does it a lot to us.
Oh, no.
He's the naughtiest.
Naughtiest? Do you agree with that, or do you think they're naughtier than you?
I think he is naughtier because because she's called Naughty and Aura. The room is getting broken. Because you're the one that's being naughty. Don't hit me.
Kingston, is that true? Do you break the most rules?
Yeah, I do. I break Stella's Legos.
Do you have anything to tell parents? Parents everywhere, what do you have to tell them? What do you think parents need to know?
I kind of understand why they make us do it, but also I kind of feel like it's bad parenting because like my mom and dad say that they don't want any more of like what we're doing when they send us to the timeout place, and so that's what. So I kind of think it's bad parenting.
You could say something else. What would you say?
I would say give me candy.
Okay.
Me too.
Candy?
What would you say, Emma?
Nothing. The kids should be able to stay up till 10 p.m. Do not give us chores.
Is there ever a time you thought you should put your dad in timeout?
Uh-huh.
What did he do?
When I asked to do the computer, he said no. And a little while, I found him on the computer. That's not even fair. I would do my favorite games, and he would say no.
No.
Reason that I'm here today, those darling little children. One of them is a bit of a narc. We have to work on that for sure. But I'm Jonathan, and those are my children. Adeline is 7, and Abbott is 5. And I'll tell you a bit about them as the day goes on, but they're a lot, and they can be a lot of work. I remember when I was, before I didn't actually expect to have children, and never really had that plan to someday have children, but I remember when I was working in retail and I was a manager of a retail store, and one of the employees was just convinced that I could not understand her struggles of life because I wasn't a parent, and she said to me, well, when you grow up and have children, you'll understand. And I was like, I don't think that grown-ups necessarily, all children are raised by grown-ups, and I don't think that you have to have a child to feel grown up. But what I didn't understand until I had children was, well, I don't think a child completes you, and I don't think that it's necessary for every person to have a child. We do know that having a child will change you, and your life will forever be different with each additional child. So we thought we wanted 3 children. We had 2, and then I only wanted 1. But still, we went through with those 2, and we're good for now, but each of them changes us in our own way. Speaking of changes, really the other thing that's changing our society right now and parenting is social media. And in social media, there's a term called sharenting. And sharenting is when parents like to overshare on social media. Sometimes we find parents only sharing the best case scenario moments, and we might feel a little bit jealous of what they're able to accomplish. And sometimes we might see them getting real, and we can relate, and that can be very helpful as well. But really, it has changed us. I mean, we tend to pause what we're doing to get the right picture. We tend to think in terms of what might be worth sharing, and we sometimes have a tendency to overshare in this world of sharenting. So before I did this tonight, I thought, well, why don't I look at my own social media and see what I'm guilty of in relation to sharenting, and also because I thought I would probably spend some time basically throwing my children under the bus tonight. I might start with some pictures of them being adorable, so you'll at least get a little bit of a balance of their life. So we have a few pictures that I've tracked down. Here we have them as cupcakes for Halloween. This was a year that their mother spent a little extra time on their costumes and made these. Has not been the case every year, but they probably did not appreciate all the work that went into them, but they suffered through them. And that was one of many Halloween experiences. I don't know, in every Halloween now, thanks to Facebook, I get to see back and look at the memories. And we had all the best intentions of having great scrapbooks that we could look back on. And we're so grateful that we have Facebook because we haven't printed a single picture in 7 years. And so the only time we see, really, any of these pictures is when we scroll through Facebook. Here they are pretending to get along, which is lovely. They're in the same bed. That, of course, did not last the full night. There are several other photos of them just kind of hanging out, looking adorable, looking like they like each other. Well, I'm not so sure on that one. One of them is liking that more than the other one is, I definitely suspect. But Facebook is great for that. It's great for posting those things. You know, and I just couldn't help myself. I thought this is a platform, so there was another post I needed to share, and this is a public service announcement because I found this as I was scrolling through, and please be aware, politics are a dangerous thing. We all have different, you know, we get behind different things, but I believe in my heart of hearts that one thing we can all get behind is the hatred of Caillou. So if you haven't encountered Caillou at this time, please avoid him at all costs. And if your child decides they like Caillou, stop that right away. I mean, there's issues with Peppa Pig. Paw Patrol is a little annoying at times, but Caillou is another level. And do not let him fool you. This is not a child with cancer that you have to feel sorry for. He just happens to be a whiny bald kid who has a presumptuous little name and will spend the whole episode complaining about what he doesn't like about his life. We do not need that modeled for our children because most of them are already talented at telling us what they don't like about their life. So we'll just take a moment to appreciate the fact that this is available. So if you haven't joined the movement, Parents Against Caillou, please take a look for that on your own. So I also found some times when I was a little more honest about the challenges of parenting, and so I wanted to capture those as well, because sometimes parenting is hard, and they're not all cute, and it's not all fun, but sometimes you just got to vent a little on Facebook. So I found a few of those that I have here. My enthusiasm when my youngest accepted my offer to take her to Funky Town diminished when she refused to believe that we'd arrived. It was quite a bubble burster when I was like, let's go to Funky Town. She was all for it. Then she did not believe that we were there. Bursted my bubble for sure. Also, you may relate to this one. My child having multiple personalities is one thing. It's another altogether when those personalities can't play nicely amongst themselves. If you've ever heard a child sitting by themselves in their room having a conversation with themselves, and then suddenly that conversation turns into an argument where their different sides to themselves can't even play along peacefully, you know you're losing your mind. Because it's one thing to correct my two children and say get along, it's another thing to try to convince my child to get along with themselves. So that was definitely a hair loss moment. And finally, I periodically check to see if the age to drop off children at the fire station has been raised by a few years. No reason. Probably not true. There is a reason, because there are days when I'm thinking it should probably be raised to the point of whatever age my child is that day, because they don't stop being frustrating at any particular age. So maybe you felt like this as well. So why are we here? What's boundaries with kids? Why does that apply to all of this? When my wife and I had that second child, suddenly we had to make decisions about daycare and things like that, and we decided that for us it would be better if one of us stayed home with the children. I was running my own business and I had a lot more flexibility in my schedule. My wife is a teacher and they wouldn't let her teach from home for whatever reason. So we decided that I would be the one to stay home for that season. And we decided that while neither of us was necessarily perfectly suited, I would probably hate it less. So I gave it a try, and I was home with both of these children for several years. Then last year, they both ended up in some kind of school. So the oldest was in kindergarten all day. The youngest was in preschool for like 2 hours. So I spent all day, taking one to this place, then taking the other one later, then picking the one up, then getting the other. So still, I was kind of chauffeuring all year. So it wasn't exactly a relaxing year, but I had a precious 2 hour 45 maybe, all to myself for the whole year, and that was delightful. And then this pesky thing rolled around called summer. Suddenly, I didn't know how much I appreciated my 2.5 hours, and then it was gone. And there they were, all day. And my wife was teaching summer school, so they were alone with me all day. And I thought, oh my gosh, they're driving me nuts. And I had this moment where I was just so frustrated with them, and I said, these children really need to learn how to behave. They need better character in their lives. Somebody needs to teach that to them. And that's when I had that little voice in my head that said, hello, you're the somebody. right? They're not going to necessarily learn this magically in school. They're not necessarily going to grow into their character. You know, they're great in a lot of ways, but they're flawed human beings, and they aren't just going to fall in line, and I probably have to do something about it myself. And I thought, okay, I'm going to try to be up to the challenge. And so we had made the delightful mistake of going on a family vacation where my wife was at a conference. So we were like, we'll hang out in the hotel, which meant that me and my 2 small children were in a small box for 7 hours while we waited for their mom to come home. And I thought, this is not a great scenario. So what I spent my time in that moment doing was reading the book, Boundaries with Kids, because I thought, let's put this, I'm less likely to kill them if I'm at least reading how to be a better parent. It'll hopefully, snap me into place. So I started reading this book, Boundaries with Kids. Now, I had been part of the Boundaries classes here at Heartland. I had been studying boundaries for a while, but I had never kind of really studied how do I connect this boundaries idea with these children, and it was really kind of a challenging thing. So parenting is exhausting. Why do we spend our time doing parenting? This is what I was doing in this small boxed room, reading this book. And these are what we do, right? It's so exhausting because we spend our time saying no to things they should not have, addressing problems they bring home with them. See, it's great when you get away from them for a little bit, but then they go and they find things that they bring home with them, and then you get to deal with that too. Resolving conflicts and power struggles, right? This is true if there are siblings. This is true if you just have conflicts between the parent and yourself, the child and the parent. You're trying to resolve those conflicts as well. We spend a lot of time working on their different character defects. We spend time helping them conquer peer pressure, deal with the stresses of growing up and going to school and having relational challenges. And we also spend our time navigating serious issues like drugs, drinking, sex, things like that as they get older, ideally. So most of these are happening right at preschool, and then you kind of grow into a few more problems as you go, which is so encouraging. But this is why it's exhausting. This is what we spend our time doing. We are putting out fires all the time. And for me, I found that all of my energy was put into dealing with this stuff, that I wasn't finding or making the time to be intentional about changing this pattern. And that's when the Boundaries with Kids book brought me some information that really helped me. So tonight, I'm really hoping that you'll gain something from that as well and be able to learn some of the tools of being able to hopefully have that intentionality with your children. So around you at your table are delightfully friendly people. You've probably already met them. You've probably said hello. Some of you are going to be terrified about spending time talking to strangers, but just pretend that you like everyone and spend a little bit of time smiling politely if you're afraid to speak. But I want you to spend a little bit of time at your table right now and get to know each other, specifically around the topic of how do the children in your life, your kids, your grandkids, maybe you're a caregiver of some kind, how do these children exhaust you? Spend a few minutes sharing at your table. For another hour, because my kids are just that frustrating. But we'll go ahead and assume that you all had at least something to say about what is a challenge for you with the kids in your life. And hopefully you got a little sense of the fact that we are all in this together. This is something that we can definitely relate to one another on. So we understand that children are a challenge. Now let's talk a little bit about what do we do with that information, and that's where the idea of the boundaries come in. Let's then just first look at what is a boundary. A boundary is a property line that defines a person. It defines where one person ends and someone else begins. If we know where a person's boundaries are, we know what we can expect this person to take control of, himself or herself. We can require responsibility in regard to feeling, behaviors, and attitude. So that is the definition of a boundary. What we'll kind of understand, though, when we're talking about boundaries, that fits very well when talking about relationships with adults. When we're talking about our relationship with other adults, it's sometimes easier to see that property line and say, okay, this is where I begin, and this is where you begin, and there's that division between us. With children, things get a little bit more blurred. For some of you, you actually physically held the same space as your child. And when they are tiny, they require, we can't just kind of put them on their side of the boundary and say, good luck with that, right? There is a whole lot that we have to do to work towards being able to have that level of boundary. So it gets a lot fuzzier than when we're working with adults. And there's another challenge, and they say it very nicely in the book. You aren't establishing a partnership with a peer. You're getting ready for a battle with someone who isn't at all interested in cooperating with you. Anyone live with someone who isn't at all interested in cooperating with you, at least from time to time? Maybe there's a few out there. That's a good definition of the battle that we are facing. Children are not born with boundaries. It's not something that anyone is born with. It's not something they pop out and say, oh, please respect my property line and I will respect yours. No, their whole goal in life is to muddy the property line and get into each other's space and into your space and into your stuff and so forth. And so much of your time with children is spent trying to walk that line between figuring out how do I create a boundary and end up with an adult child someday that we can have that clear-cut property line with. And that's the challenge. So one of the things that I started reading this book, I saw lots of goals that parents might have with raising their children. I picked 3 goals from the book that I thought this describes me and my circumstances. So for me, my first goal was to set limits and consequences. So I'm sitting in this tiny box, in this tiny hotel room with these 2 small children who apparently do not have an off switch. And they are constantly at each other, constantly at me. We're out of our comfort zone. We're trying to figure it all out. And it's like, I need these children to understand, that I'm serious when I say something, and they need to believe in the consequences that I'm giving them. And so I'm like, that's what I need to figure out how to do. I have a goal of having to be able to set limits and consequences, a goal that they understand what happens when you don't do this, because the sheer will of my wanting them to do it wasn't enough. They did not care that I wanted them to do it. They needed to figure out, how does this work within a sense of consequences? The second goal I had was to avoid the nagging trap. If you ever felt like you were stuck in a cycle of nagging where you feel like all you're doing is reminding them of the same thing you just reminded them of, I know that I'm stuck in the nagging track when I'm seconds away from shaking them. And I say, this is a problem, must step back. And how do I avoid this nagging trap? You get tired of hearing yourself say the same thing. You're like, I'm tired of hearing it. Why are you not hearing it? Clearly, the message was not getting through. So I was stuck in this nagging trap. They were very comfortable in the nagging trap because they were simply ignoring me. But I was very uncomfortable in the nagging trap. And the third goal was to teach my kids to be responsible for themselves. And this is a big one because they were, especially my eldest, she was just at that age. She was coming out of kindergarten, and I realized, at this point, we are fully responsible for her. We are the ones that, time for your homework. Have you done your homework? What do you have to do for school tomorrow? We were getting everything ready, and we're like, this is kindergarten. If this is happening, and when she's a senior in high school, we're going to have a problem. But what I realized is unless we change something, that's where we were heading. So even though it's perfectly fine for me to, assist my child in kindergarten, I needed to figure out, how do I teach my child to be responsible for herself? That has to start now. In the book, it talks about that the future is now because we are building that character for the future. And so if the future is now, I need to start now. She's in kindergarten. Okay, that resonated with me. So I had those 3 goals of definitely teaching my kids to be responsible for themselves, avoiding the nagging trap, and set limits and consequences. So we're going to just take another few minutes at your table, and now can you talk about what goals do you have with the children in your life? What goals are resonating with you that you would like to see as you are tackling the challenge that is children? Enjoy that conversation. Again, you probably have more goals too, ideally. Hopefully many of you had a chance to talk about those and talk about the goals that you have for your children as well. And so basically, the final slide we'll look at before break here just kind of describes for us what it looks like if a child has if their boundaries are clear, they develop these qualities. And we'll read through those, and as we're reading through them, think about if that describes what you would want your child to have. A bunch of clear children develop the quality of a well-defined sense of who they are. They develop the quality of knowing what they are responsible for. They develop the quality of having the ability to choose and the understanding that if they choose well, things will go well, and if they choose poorly, they will suffer. And finally, they develop the possibility for true love based in freedom. And true love here, we're not talking about like the Princess Bride true love. We're talking about being able to experience actual love, not necessarily romantic love, but relational love, and have actual connectivity with other people that is the healthiest that it can be. And so that I got stuck on this list because I thought, yeah, these are all things that I want for my children. So then I had to go to the next step of the book and figure out, how do I make this happen? How do I implement boundaries in my children's life? So we're going to talk about that. But before we do, we're going to give you more sugar and hope to prepare you for the hard work that is ahead. So we're going to take a quick 10-minute break. There's some cookies out there for you.
It's gross.
Grace got tissues.
I'm gonna wipe your face.
It's okay, Grace got
Wipe
tissues.
off.
He's helping him. Go ahead. Give her a little wipe. You can just use the whole thing. Yeah, there you go. Wipe your face off. Don't wipe your face off.
Stop it.
There we go. Thank you, Greg. And then just put them back in your pocket. Look at his face.
So Emma, do you like bossing these two around?
No. Do you like when Susie and your brother listen to you?
No. Perfect.
Yep.
Are you perfect?
Kinda.
Kind of. Okay.
That isn't kinda good. I clean up.
Are you perfect?
No, no one's perfect.
Are you perfect?
No.
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 Why not?
Because I have a lot of things that, well, I don't know.
So you guys told me that you guys are perfect, right? Yeah. Are your parents perfect?
Sometimes.
Sometimes.
Because sometimes they yell at us.
What do you love most about your mom?
I love most because she gives me a lot of hugs and kisses. Whenever we get hurt, they help us until it feels better. They comfort us and they hug us when we're sad and stuff.
They do a lot of things for us.
How do you show them that you love them?
We
Sometimes do the chores without asking.
yeah.
I can make pancakes for them.
Yeah, like I washed the dishes the other day and she was making pancakes.
Why do you think there are rules?
To keep me safe and to get me from doing things that when I grow up won't be like I could lose my job or something.
Who cooks better, your mom or your dad?
My mom.
Your mom? All right. Who cooks better, your mom or McDonald's?
Mom.
Mom? Good. Good.
Mom. Ben.
Ben? You still vote Ben over your mom and dad?
Ben.
All right. Let's see. Who makes better food, mom or McDonald's?
Mom. McDonald's. Because I get a toy. Yeah, that's not about food though.
All
But-
right. Ruby, do you like Ben's cooking or McDonald's more?
Ben's.
Ben's? Wow. Ben, you must make some really good eggs then.
My parents say it's just because I have a non-stick pan. It's a different kind of pan than they use. And sometimes the sticks is still, it's not as good as Ben's.
Do you guys have a lot of rules at your house?
Not really, but the rules that really matter.
Do you want to stay a kid forever?
Mhm.
Why?
I don't want to die.
Do you like growing up?
No. For a kid, you get to do many more things, but when you're an adult, you have to pay bills.
And Lucas, do you like growing up?
I guess sometimes.
Do you want to stay a kid forever?
Kind of.
What do you think would be fun about that?
So I wouldn't have to work around the house a lot, like more than when you're a kid, when you can just play.
What do you think it means to be free?
To be able to do whatever you want. You might have rules, but you have a choice in it.
Okay.
To not have to be under someone's control. Kind of like be able to do whatever you want.
What does time heals all wounds mean?
If someone's frustrating you or something, you can go to your room or go in a different room and just take a minute and relax before you go into the chaos again.
Time can help you heal the thing that you got hurt on you.
That's a great answer, Baby.
That patience is important.
Well, we got some good insight there. I will say we did try to get Ben's eggs to cater tonight, but he was booked, so we were not able to get whatever those delicious eggs are for tonight. But all right, so far we've established that we're in this together, and we've talked about boundaries, why we need them. But let's talk a little bit about how to implement them, and that is probably the most challenging part of the process. Is we know what we want, we know the goals that we have, but how do we make that a reality? And so we're just going to talk through some of those today. But I have a disclaimer for you first. All right, before you try to tackle boundaries, be aware that you will fail. You will fail at implementing boundaries because you have a non-cooperating force in your zone here who's going to fight back in this process. And so don't go into it thinking that there's some magical formula that's going to make this all easy in any way. We're going to talk about the tools that we have, but we need to be prepared for the fact that we're going to lose some of these battles and we're going to fail along the way. But the key is to persevere through the process and keep that big picture in mind as we go through it. We fail all the time. Right now we are in a series of failures. My youngest child has many great qualities, but one quality she has is that she's evil. And she has made up her mind that if something displeases her, she should melt down and simply not function anymore. And so we are currently in a struggle with her in the mornings when it's time to get up. She has this amazing ability that on a day when there is no school, she has no problem getting up. If there is school, it is like we are forcing her to, obviously to some sort of execution chamber or something because she is determined that she is not going to go. And we have had these conversations about what are we going to do about this, how are we going to implement this, and the reality is there are mornings when we physically have to put her clothes on her body and put her out the door because really, in this situation, we would love to be able to have a boundary situation where we're like, hey, this is the consequence. Unfortunately, in this case, the consequence is everyone is late to work in school, and everyone else suffers because she chooses not to get up in the morning. And so we haven't found that magical moment yet. We're still in the failing process. But that's part of it. Part of it is we're trying something new each time to see how we can to motivate the second child. The first child is different, easier to motivate in some ways. The second child is just slightly more evil. So as we figure out how to work with her and figure out how we get her moving in the morning, we realize, well, we're going to fail, but we're going to keep trying until we figure out what works in this situation, and we can't stop when we fail. So don't fear failing, because that will happen. There are 6 steps that Boundaries suggests for implementing boundaries. So we're going to go through each of these 6 steps. So step number 1 has 3 points. Step number 1, we need to see the 3 realities, they call it, 3 realities that will help us with this process. The first reality is it really is a problem. Your child is not perfect. We have to accept the reality that our children are not perfect. This can be difficult for some people, and you probably have some people in your life who make excuses for their children, and that can be very frustrating. And the reality is, it's okay to own the fact that, my kid is, well, in my case, evil. But you can say, my kid is frustrating, my kid is challenged, my kid has difficulties, my kid is not perfect. Some of the excuses people use, right, you might have heard these. a child who is a sarcastic and a smart aleck, people will say, oh, he just has a cute sense of humor. Maybe not cute to me, right? If they're the child that you see who's lazy, and parents will say, oh, they're just tired. They didn't get enough sleep, right? And yesterday they didn't get enough sleep, and the day before they didn't get enough sleep, and the day before they didn't get enough sleep, and so maybe it's a sleep issue, maybe they are lazy. Intrusive children might be called high-spirited. High-spirited, If they have a lack of discipline, sometimes they are called gifted. They're just gifted. That's all. They can't be expected to adhere to the same rules as everybody else. They're gifted. Maybe an excuse. They lack initiative. They're just bored. There is nothing external to entertain them. They're bored. What do you expect from them? Well, initiative. And if they don't have patience, sometimes they're just not feeling well. Right? They're just not themselves today. Well, we would like for themselves to be more patient. So we have to accept the fact that there really is a problem. Your child is not perfect. Also, number 2, the problem really isn't the problem. It's a symptom of a boundary problem. And this was important for me when I went through this process of learning, because I had to realize sometimes I wanted to address, what I was addressing was the symptom itself. What is addressing, I thought this is the problem, and I was addressing that and trying to fix that, but the actual problem was behind that, and that's not where I was putting my energy. Some examples of that. Outward problem might be getting bad grades. So if children are getting bad grades, we think we have to deal with the grades, where the actual boundary problem is that they have perhaps a lack of concern about consequences. If they try to control other kids, we think, oh, this is a problem, but the real problem is that they have a lack of respect for others' boundaries. If you have a child that doesn't listen to instruction, it might be because they lack the fear of consequences. And if a child has a defiant attitude, they may lack boundaries regarding entitlement. So sometimes there is the thing we see, and then we have to look at what's the boundary problem behind that, and there we'll get, if we put our energy into dealing with that, then we will probably have more success in tackling it. And the third step, or the third part of the first step, I should say, is that time does not heal all. And this is an unfortunate reality. When my child was 2, in the terrible 2s, I've soon learned that there was something called the more terrible 3s. And then that translates into the 4s, which were not always a picnic either. And so if I'm waiting for them to grow out of these behaviors, it led to frustration, because it turned out some of their behaviors changed as they growed and matured, but really that time wasn't fixing everything, right? Time didn't, it just sort of started to compound the issue, and they had a similar problem in an older body. And so the problem actually kind of got worse instead of getting better with time. So we have to first, if we can put these 3 things in, stop making excuses, try to figure out what the problem really is, and recognize that it's probably not going to fix itself. That's our first step to implementing boundaries. The second step for implementing boundaries is to plug in to get support. If you found it helpful tonight to even just talk and commiserate with other people about why it's so challenging to parent, you understand a bit why it's so important to plug in and have support. We can't do this alone. It's really tough. They will wear you down and they will win, but you have to have that support and you have to plug in. And we're going to talk a little later about some opportunities here at Heartland that you can plug in, but we also just want you to be aware of taking advantage of the resources that are in your life. You want to try to work as a team. You know, obviously if you have a dual parent situation, you want to work together and plug in and be supporting one another. I know that sometimes things aren't so picture perfect, right? And so it is still possible to find the support that you can find, even if the co-parent that you're working with isn't on the same page as you. If it's a grandparent situation, if you're worried about your grandkids, but you don't get to spend all the day with them, and you're like, oh, what can I do? The key is to take advantage of whatever time you do have and be able to implement those boundaries in the opportunities that are there and work around the challenges that come up, because there will be challenges. But I know it's not always ideal, but however you can, whatever makes sense to your situation, plug in and get support around you. And again, stay tuned for some more information about how you can plug in even here at Heartland for those kind of opportunities. Step 3 is a little rough. We might not like it as much, but if we want to implement boundaries, we must grow in boundaries personally. If we're going to implement boundaries with our children, we have to have boundaries, because first we have to model those boundaries. Our kids have to see us using boundaries in our own life. They have to see us using those boundaries with our spouse or with the other people that we are connected to. And we have to be true to our own boundaries when we're dealing with the kids. So if we're going to have boundaries with our kids, that by definition we have to have those boundaries. So as you're progressing through this process, know that a big step is to continue to grow in your own boundaries as you go through that. The last three are going to kind of help us with some of this, some tools and some tricks that will help us out. So step 4, before it's important as you're kind of going through this process, to evaluate and plan. Evaluate and plan. And what that just means is, I thought that I wanted my kids to have boundaries while my kids were not having boundaries. Like when it was frustrating, when everything was going wrong, when I'm just ready to shake them, I'm like, you need boundaries. That is not, as it turns out, a great time to try to implement a boundary, because everything is heated, everything is gone crazy, and we're 4 steps ahead of the process of being able to slow things down and talk about how boundaries apply. So we must evaluate and plan. We have to do this ahead of time. So in the example of my child who doesn't want to get dressed in the morning, we don't have that conversation in the morning while she's not willing to get dressed. We have the conversation the night before to say, all right, what are we trying next? What else are we going to do in this kind of a situation? That's the ideal time, is to evaluate what the problem is, talk about the solution, and plan it together so we can follow through. But the next critical part of that is step 5, which is to present the plan. So for boundaries to work, we have to make people aware of our boundaries. We can't just have the boundary in our head and kind of cross our fingers and hope for the best. We have to present the plan to whomever we have the boundary with, and that includes our children. So again, in our situation, first we discuss it, we evaluate, we plan, then we have to sit down and say, hey, tomorrow, this is what's going to happen if this behavior happens. Because while that's going on, she does not care. She does not, no words of little nuggets of wisdom are going to resonate in her screaming head, and she's not going to respond in that moment. So when she's calm, and when, that evil side is down, and she's like a normal human child, and we can have a conversation with her, that's when we have to introduce the idea, and we have to share with her, this is the plan, this is the situation, because the boundary isn't going to work if she isn't aware of it. So we have to evaluate and plan, and then present that plan, and of course the dreaded follow through over time. We have to be consistent with the process. Now that doesn't mean we can't adapt with our boundaries. It certainly doesn't mean that one size fits all for their entire life, right? Boundaries can need to be evaluated and reevaluated as time goes on, but to some extent we have to follow through and be consistent in order for that boundary to work. So if we said, this is what's going to happen tomorrow, and that doesn't happen tomorrow, then we've basically erased that opportunity, and we have to try again, because we are teaching that this really isn't a boundary. It has to be followed through, and it has to be consistent over time, not just the next day when I'm really thinking about it, but the next day, and the next day, and the next day, for it to really be an effective boundary. So those are the 6 steps to implementing boundaries, and that is available in your book, of course, as well. It is the thing about boundaries at the end of the day, they're really not as complicated. They're just really hard, right? There's not so much that I just can't wrap my mind around this. We can figure out what our goal is. We can figure out what we think we need to do to achieve that, but it's just hard to do it. It's hard. And why is that? Because we're like we talked about at the beginning, we're under constant pressure of getting timing and them being in our face and life being hard, and we have to figure out how to be intentional, pause things, have these kind of conversations, and stop that cycle that we get into with children when life gets crazy. And unfortunately, as they get older and get busier, it gets that all the more difficult. So we really have opportunities at every stage to figure out how do we slow this down and be able to do this, even though it's hard. It can be really challenging, but it can also work if we make that intention and kind of go at it that way. We get in the way of boundaries a lot. That can be another challenge, right? We get in the way of trying to protect our children from that process. We can be a kind of a stumbling block for that situation. So we just want to make sure that, that we know. It's important that you know that it can get complicated, right? It can get a complicated situation, and other adults in the situation, it gets complicated. Working with teachers at school adds a complication, right? There's a lot of factors within the process of boundaries that we can't necessarily control. And the only thing we can control is our role in that and practicing our own boundaries. But be prepared for it to get complicated, and for what's in the book and what looks like a great idea may not translate in real life in your situation nearly as smoothly as it sounds in the book. But we just have to, again, have that perseverance of, okay, let's try this a different way. Let's adapt and see where we can take it from there. But we know, again, boundaries are not easy, and we thought it would be a great idea tonight to give you an opportunity to kind of work on a boundary situation and implementing some boundaries in your groups as part of your discussion. So you have your little handout here. On the first page here are just some of the slides that were up there, some of the key slides that give you information about the boundaries process and so forth for you to take with you. The next page is this situation. So we thought I certainly could use advice with my child in their situation, but I felt like probably I put them through enough tonight through this process. So we found this article on Reddit where a real life situation, where an individual was having an issue with their child and their school situation. And so we were able to put that in there for you guys to read through they're having a behavior issue. And then it also has the added bonus of having the teacher's perspective on that situation. So this might resonate with you as well. So in your groups now, we're going to give you an opportunity to look at those two slides, that situation that's happening, and see, can you offer any advice to this parent based on what you were learning tonight? And are any of the, whether it's the 6 steps or whether it's any of the other things that we talked about, what kind of advice could you give this person and how boundaries might be of help to him in his particular situation? So spend some time seeing what you can tackle together, and if you want to squeeze in some of your own experiences along the way, that's fine, but we'll go ahead and give you that chance to work together at your table.